The sky over Maple Ridge looked heavier than usual that evening, like it was holding back snow, or maybe holding back something else entirely. I drove slowly down my dad's street with both hands tight on the wheel, the heater trying its best to fight the cold seeping in from every angle. On the passenger seat sat the warm apple crumble I had baked from my mom's old recipe. It had been her Christmas dish, the one she made every year until the winter she got sick. I want to ask you something before I go on. What are you doing right now while listening to this story? For me, at the exact moment everything happened, I was sitting in my car with the heater barely warming my fingers, holding the dessert my mom used to make every holiday, and telling myself this year would be different. I parked in front of my dad's house and sat there for a moment, watching the lights flicker through the frosted windows. Every decoration was perfect. Perfect ribbons, perfect garlands, perfect angles. It looked expensive, the way Lily always liked things to look. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, pulled my coat tight, and told myself arriving early might start the night on the right foot. Maybe Dad would appreciate that I made the effort. Maybe he would hug me. Maybe for once it would feel like the holidays used to feel before everything got complicated. The wind bit at my face as I walked up the front path. I held the warm dish close to my chest and felt the heat slip into my gloves. My breath was a pale cloud rising in front of me as I reached the porch. The wreath hanging on the door looked like something from a catalog, perfectly symmetrical, perfectly staged. Nothing like the ones Mom and I made together at the dining table when I was little. I pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed through the house. I heard footsteps, a few voices, a burst of laughter, the click of glass on glass. I stood there with a small, hopeful smile I did not even realize I was wearing. Then my dad's voice shot through the door, loud enough to hit me like a slap. "Go away. Lily does not want you here. Only important people today." For a second, I honestly thought I misheard him. My fingers tightened around the dish. My heart kicked once hard against my ribs. I waited for the door to open, waited for some explanation, waited for anything. But instead, I heard Emma's voice floating from inside. A light, amused sound, followed by Jonathan laughing like something about this was funny. Their footsteps moved closer, then away again, like they were walking past the door without even caring I was standing on them. The other side. The cold cut right through me. I felt it in my chest more than on my skin. The words, "only important people today," hung in the air like they were made of ice. I did not ring again. I did not knock. I just turned around and walked back to my car, my boots hitting the walkway too hard. My eyes stung, but the cold dried the tears before they could fall. By the time I pulled the car door open, my hands were shaking too badly to hold the dessert steady. I sat there in the driver's seat, staring at his house, glowing with warm lights, filled with voices that suddenly felt like strangers. My own dad had thrown me out of Christmas. For Lily, for Emma, for Jonathan, for people who had known him for a handful of years, while I had known him my entire life. I drove home with the radio off, unable to stomach a single cheerful song. The taste of humiliation clung to the back of my throat. My apartment felt smaller than usual when I walked inside. I set the dessert on the counter and left it untouched. My hands were still trembling. My mind kept replaying the moment my dad shouted through the door. "Go away. Only important people." I walked into the living room and sank down onto the carpet in front of the framed picture of my mom. Her smile in that photo had always been a kind of comfort to me, something warm and unwavering. Tonight, it hurt to look at her. It hurt to imagine what she would say if she had been there. I pressed my fingers against the bottom of the frame and whispered into the quiet apartment. What did I do wrong? I must have said it again and again without realizing it. The question looped through me like a heartbeat I could not control. My coat was still on. My scarf was still around my neck. I felt like if I moved even an inch, everything inside me would spill out. I sat there for a long time, long enough for the heater to hum through another cycle, long enough for the neighbors across the courtyard to turn off their lights, one by one. And in the silence, a small thought crept in. I wondered what other people were doing when moments like this found them. Breakups, betrayals, family cutting them off. I wondered if they were standing at the sink or folding laundry or driving, home from work, not expecting their whole world to shift. I do not know what you are doing right now while listening to my story, but in that exact moment, I was sitting on my living room floor, still wearing my coat, staring at my mom's picture, and trying to breathe past the feeling that something in my life had splintered beyond repair. And if you stay with me through this story, you will see how that night was only the beginning. What happened after was far worse, before the truth finally rose to the surface. I sat there whispering the same question to the photo in front of me. What did I do wrong? But the truth was already moving toward me, changing shape in the dark, getting ready to show itself in a way I could never have predicted. The next morning, the light leaking through my blinds felt too bright. I had fallen asleep on the living room floor with my coat still on and my cheek pressed against the carpet. When I finally pushed myself upright, everything inside me felt stiff and hollow, like my chest had been scraped out by the night before. I sat there staring at the picture of my mom for a long moment, letting the silence soak in. Then my phone started ringing on the kitchen counter. The sound cut through the quiet like a sharp edge. I stood slowly, walked over, and looked at the screen. Dad. My stomach tightened. Part of me thought maybe he was calling to apologize, or at least to explain what had happened the night before. Maybe he regretted shouting at me. Maybe he planned to say he had been overwhelmed, or confused, or anything that resembled caring about what he had done. I answered. Before I could even say hello, he started talking. He sounded brisk, almost cheerful, as if the previous night had never happened. He told me he needed the key to the cabin. He said Jonathan believed the cabin could use a major renovation to increase its value. He said they wanted to get it ready for Emma's wedding, so the whole event could feel special and elegant. After that, he explained they could list it on Airbnb to bring in extra money for the family. For a few seconds, I simply stood there with the phone pressed to my ear, stunned into stillness. The cabin. That cabin. My grandmother's cabin. My mom's cabin. My cabin. He kept talking. His tone was impatient now, like he was working through a long to-do list and I was delaying the next step. Lily had mentioned that the cabin would be much more useful if the whole family could access it. She believed the cabin should be considered family property, something everyone could enjoy. He said they needed the key that morning so Jonathan and Emma could drive up and look at the layout. He said all of it as if he had not screamed at me the night before, as if I had not walked away from his front door humiliated, as if he had not chosen Lily's people over me with barely a breath of hesitation. There was no apology. Not a single word about Christmas Eve, not a hint of regret. The only thing he cared about was the cabin. I stood there, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. My chest tightened again, but this time it felt different. Not sadness, not fear, something sharper, quieter, something that felt like the beginning of understanding. I asked him which cabin he meant, even though I knew the answer. My voice came out softer than I intended. He sounded annoyed that I even asked. He said the cabin up in Cedar Hollow, the one Mom had loved so much, the one he assumed I would hand over for the wedding preparations. He repeated that it was more practical for the family to use the cabin than let it sit empty under my sole control. The words hit me in slow motion. Family property, practical, empty, sole control. He said them like they were facts written in stone. He said them as if my grandmother had not handed that cabin to my mom in a moment of love, as if my mom had not placed it in my hands when she knew she would not be, around to guide me into adulthood, as if every memory built in that cabin did not belong to me. He kept talking, and I heard only one word repeating in my head. Cabin. Not Claire, not Christmas, not sorry, not my daughter. Cabin. I finally murmured that I heard him. I said I would think about it and call him back. He objected. He said there was no thinking to do. He needed the key this morning. They had plans. He said Emma was excited about the idea of a lakeside wedding. He said Jonathan wanted to inspect the plumbing and electrical to begin, mapping out the renovation. Renovation. My stomach turned. I imagined the cabin torn apart. I imagined the handmade wooden shelves my grandmother built herself, ripped out, for something modern. I imagined the old quilts my mom kept folded in the cedar chest being tossed. Aside for new bedding Lily picked from a catalog. I imagined them repainting the walls, replacing the floorboards, adding polished countertops and trendy fixtures until not a trace of my family remained. I felt sick. He kept talking. His tone shifted when he realized I was not agreeing fast enough. He said I should stop being difficult. He said Emma's wedding deserved to be perfect. He said Airbnb income could help everyone if I stopped being sentimental about the place. Sentimental. The word lodged in my throat like a stone. He kept going, layering those words over and over. Family property, renovation, Airbnb, perfect wedding, practical, useful, sentimental, difficult, cabin, cabin, cabin. I stood there with the phone to my ear, my eyes dry but burning. The sunlight from the window landed on the apple crumble still sitting, untouched on the counter. The same dessert he had rejected without even knowing I had carried it to his door. My hands freezing, heart open, ready to celebrate with him. He did not mention it. He never would. When he stopped to take a breath, I finally said I needed to call him back. He started to protest again. I cut him off. My voice came out flat and steady in a way that surprised me. I said I would call back. Then I hung up before he could argue. The silence that followed felt huge, like the space between me and my dad had stretched so far I was not sure a bridge could ever exist again. I set the phone down. My hands were trembling again, but differently this time. I walked back toward the living room. The morning sunlight hit the picture of my mom on the wall. Her smile looked soft, like she understood something I had not fully accepted yet. I remembered the cabin the way she used it. Warm evenings, quiet mornings, the smell of pine trees after rain. I remembered the summers we spent reading on the porch, the winters when we sat near the fireplace with blankets over our legs, the nights when the wind rattled the windows and she held my hand until I fell asleep. I remembered the day she told me the cabin would be mine. She said it gently, like she knew what it meant to me. She said I would understand one day why she wanted it to stay in my name. She told me I needed something that would always belong to me no matter what life looked like later. Now I am beginning to understand. Now it hurts in a way I had not expected. I paced the apartment for a while, my mind spinning between memories and the call from my dad. The way he talked to me felt rehearsed, like he had already decided I would say yes, like he had been convinced by someone else that the cabin did not really belong to me, but to him, to Emma, to Lily, to Jonathan. I could hear Lily's voice in his words, calm, polished, reasonable on the surface. The way she talked about fairness, the way she framed every conversation as if she were offering a gift rather than taking something. I could imagine the conversations they had behind closed doors, the little suggestions, the logic that was not logic at all. The way she might have leaned in and said something like, "It is wasteful to let Claire hold on to it alone." My fingers tightened around my phone. Something about it felt off. Something had shifted in my dad long before Christmas Eve. And now the pieces were starting to fall into place. I sat back down on the floor in front of Mom's picture. I told her what happened, even though I knew she could not answer. I told her Dad had shouted at me. I told her he pretended nothing happened. I told her he wanted the cabin. Then I asked the question that had been sitting beneath every other thought. Why now? Why this sudden interest in a place he barely visited? Why this urgency? Why this assumption that I would hand it over? I did not have the answer yet, but I knew one thing for sure. It had nothing to do with love or family. It had to do with control, and maybe something darker, something I had not uncovered yet. I stayed there for a long time. The sunlight moved across the carpet. The heater clicked on and off. Outside, a car door slammed, and someone called out to a neighbor. Life went on around me, but inside, everything felt suspended. Finally, I stood up and wiped my hands on my jeans. I went to the sink and ran water over the dessert dish. The water warmed my fingers slowly. I washed the dish until my hands stopped shaking. When I dried it and set it back on the shelf, something inside me settled. Not peace, not clarity, something small and steady, like the beginning of resolve. I walked back to the kitchen table, picked up my phone, stared at the screen for a long moment, and whispered to myself without even thinking, "This is not just about a cabin." Then I took a breath, and I called him back. He answered on the second ring. "Claire?" His voice came through tight, like he had been pacing. "So, the key?" I swallowed. "This will not be a quick yes," I said. "I need to look at some things first." "What things?" He sounded irritated already. "You are overthinking this. It is a cabin, not a court case. Jonathan is ready to go up there today. Emma is making plans. You are the only one holding us back." The words "holding us back" landed hard. My fingers curled tighter around the phone. "Dad," I said slowly, "that place is not just some asset you can move around on a spreadsheet. It is tied to Mom, to Grandma, to me. I am not handing anything over until I make sure I understand exactly where I stand." "You are being dramatic," he snapped. Lily thinks I cut him off before I could stop myself. I do not care what Lily thinks right now. The line went very quiet. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped lower. "Claire." I took a breath, steadying myself. "I am not saying no," I said, and the words tasted strange because a large part of me already wanted to say exactly that. "I am saying I will call you after I have checked on a few things. That is it." He exhaled sharply, frustrated. "Fine. But do not drag your feet. We do not have all the time in the world." He hung up before I could respond. I stood there in the kitchen, with the phone still pressed to my ear, feeling the echo of his impatience hang in the air. For a long moment, I stared at the blank screen. Then I slipped the phone into my pocket and walked toward the small built-in desk in the corner of my living room. The bottom drawer stuck a little, the way it always did, and the familiar resistance actually calmed me. I pulled it open and lifted out the faded green folder where I kept all the important papers my mom once nagged me about. She had always said, "Keep your documents where you can find them on your worst day." I had never imagined my worst day would look like this. I carried the folder to the dining table and spread out its contents. The legal envelopes, the photocopies with raised stamps, the handwritten notes, my life in paper form. I started with the date everything broke, the year my mom died, 2018. I was 24. I could still see the hospital room, the way the late afternoon light slanted through the blinds, the way my dad stood at the window with his shoulders bowed as if he had suddenly aged 10 years in a week. After the funeral, while I was still moving through the days like a ghost, he had pressed me to meet with her lawyer in town. "You have to know what she wanted," he had said back then, his voice gentler than it was now. "She did not want you confused." I had sat in a stiff chair in a small office with diplomas on the wall, while the attorney explained my mom's will. There had not been much. Some savings, her car, jewelry with more emotional than financial value. But when he got to the cabin, his voice shifted just slightly. "Your mom was very clear about this," he had said. "She wrote that the cabin was to go to you specifically, not as part of a shared estate, as your separate property." At 24, my brain was still fogged with grief. I nodded, not fully grasping the weight of what that meant. I had just thought it was sweet that she wanted me to have our special place. I had not thought at all about remarriage or inheritance or anyone else having an opinion. 2 years later, in early 2020, I sat in the same office signing the papers that made it official. By then, I was 26. I remember my hand cramping a little from all the signatures, my dad sitting next to me in a gray sweater, watching quietly. "Your mom would be proud of you," he had said afterward as we walked to the parking lot. "You handled that like a pro." The cabin title had been transferred fully into my name. No mention of him. No extra clauses. Just my name on that line. That same year, sometime that summer, he met Lily at a church barbecue, and within months, they were inseparable. By the end of that year, he was 61 and remarried, living in a tastefully decorated house across town that did not feel like it held any trace of my mom. I looked at the dates on the documents in front of me. 2018, 2020. The timeline was clear in a way I had never bothered to notice before. My mom died. The cabin passed to me. Only after that did my dad's life move in a new direction. The cabin had never passed through his hands. Not once. If a lawyer drew a line of ownership, it would go from my grandmother to my mom to me. My dad did not appear anywhere on that line. Lily certainly did not. Neither did Emma or her fiancé. It was such a simple truth, but somehow I had almost let other people talk me out of it. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, letting the reality settle into place. Every word Dad had thrown at me that morning about family property sounded different now. All this pressure was not backed by facts. It was backed by assumption and entitlement. And it was not just his. I started replaying smaller scenes in my mind, little offhand comments from the last year or so that had slid past me at the time. There was that cookout in late summer when I had gone over to Dad and Lily's house. The grill had been smoking in the backyard. Lily had set out matching plates and napkins like we were hosting a magazine shoot. Emma had arrived late, breezing in with her designer bag and talking non-stop about her engagement ring and her wedding board on some app. At one point, we were all out on the deck, and she had turned to me with that bright, slightly sharp smile she wore when she thought she was being clever. "You know, Claire, it is kind of crazy you keep that whole cabin to yourself," she had said, laughing like it was a joke. "It is such a big place for one person. Think of all the beautiful things we could do with it if it was really a family space." I remembered feeling a little stung, but I had swallowed it down. I told her I did not keep it to myself. I just liked it quiet. That was where Mom and I had spent our time. That I did not want to turn every corner of my life into a group project. She had shrugged, eyes sliding past me as if she were not really hearing what I was saying. "You are too attached to the past," she had tossed back lightly. "Life moves on." Then Jonathan had joined in, pretending to offer friendly advice. He had pulled out his phone and started listing off nightly rates he had seen. "For cabins near Cedar Hollow, you are missing out, Claire," he had said, shaking his head in mock disbelief. "You could be making really good money on weekends. I work in real estate. I know what I am talking about. I could help you set it up, no problem. We could handle the bookings. Handle all the stuff that feels complicated. All you would have to do is hand over the key." At the time, I had laughed a little and said, "Thanks, but no thanks." I had told him I wanted the cabin to stay a place that felt like home, not a revolving door of strangers. He had smiled tightly and changed the subject, but I remembered something flickering across his face. A quick calculation. Then there were the smaller comments from Lily. On a phone call in the fall, she had brought up the cabin almost casually while we were discussing. "Thanksgiving side dishes. Your dad worries about you up there by yourself," she had said in that smooth voice of hers. "It might be better in the long run if we looked at making the cabin more of an official family property. That way, everything is clear for the future. You would not have to bear the responsibility alone." At the time, I had been in the middle of a work deadline and only half listening. I had murmured something non-committal, said we could talk about it another time. Then the topic shifted, and I never pressed her on what she really meant by clear. Now, sitting at my table with the documents in front of me, those little moments lined up like puzzle pieces that had been scattered across months. Emma called me selfish under a veneer of sweetness. Jonathan pushed the Airbnb idea like a salesman. Lily talks about responsibility and clarity and safety, all of it circling the same target. My phone buzzed where it lay next to the folder. A text from Dad blinked onto the screen. Just 3 words. "Have the key." I stared at it. The lack of a question mark said more than the words themselves. It was not a question. It was an expectation. Something cold and clean slid into place inside me then. Maybe for the first time in my life, I saw my dad not just as my parent, but as a man making choices. Choices influenced by his new wife. Choices that did not automatically deserve my silent obedience. I thought about how common this kind of thing was, even if people did not talk about it much. Friends watching their inheritance shift after a remarriage. Older relatives being nudged into signing papers they barely understood. Children being sidelined while new spouses and their grown kids moved into the center of financial decisions. None of that had to be dramatic on the surface, to be dangerous underneath. Maybe being shut out of Christmas had not just been about mood or convenience. Maybe it had been a way to show Lily and Emma that he was fully in their corner. A way to prove he would choose them over me, even on a night meant for family. And once he had crossed that line, how much easier was it to push the next boundary, to ask for the cabin key, like it was his due. I looked down at my mom's handwriting on one of the photocopied notes. The lawyer had given me a small line she had added about wanting me to have stability no matter what happened with my dad's life. She had not known future names or faces. She had just known human nature. I gathered the papers into a neat stack and slid them back into the folder. I did not have every piece of the picture yet. I did not know exactly what Lily had said behind closed doors or what Jonathan and Emma were plotting when they looked at wedding budgets and Airbnb listings. But I knew enough. I knew that what was happening to me was not rare. I knew that if I stayed quiet, the story would continue the way they had written it in their minds. And I knew one more thing. As surely as I knew my own name, being pushed off that porch on Christmas Eve might not have been an emotional outburst. It might have been the opening move in something much bigger. That thought sat in my chest like a stone while I cleared the table and put the folder back in the drawer. I walked around my apartment for a while without really seeing anything. Dishes in the sink, an unfolded blanket on the couch, a plant in the corner that needed watering. Ordinary things, but none of them felt real. Every time I passed the hallway, my eyes drifted toward my bedroom, toward the old cedar chest at the foot of my bed. I had not opened that chest in a long time. Not since the first months after Mom died, when everything I touched of hers felt too raw. For a while, I had kept it closed on purpose, like leaving it shut would keep my grief neatly packed away too. Now something about it pulled at me. I went into the bedroom and stood at the foot of the bed, staring down at the smooth wood. My grandmother had given this chest to my mom when she was a young woman. Mom used to say it held her life in layers. Wedding dress, baby clothes, letters. Little bits of history that never made it to the photo albums. I knelt and ran my hand along the lid. The cedar smell rose up the second I lifted it. That warm, deep scent of old wood that never quite goes away. Inside were the things I had tucked away after we cleared out Mom's house. A folded quilt she had sewn when I was a teenager. A few of her scarves. A jewelry box with a broken clasp. A stack of cards from birthdays and holidays. And near the bottom, under a worn sweater that still looked like her, there was an envelope with my name on it. My heart gave a painful little jump. I recognized her handwriting instantly. I had almost forgotten about this letter, but as soon as I saw it, I remembered the day she gave it to me. It was the year before she died, 2017. She had already been sick, moving slower, hair thinner under her favorite knit cap. We had been sitting at her kitchen table when she slid the envelope across to me. She had told me, "You do not have to read it now. Just keep it somewhere safe. For later." I had not wanted to think about it later. At 23, later meant a world where she was not here, and I had been too scared to open anything that acknowledged that. So I tucked it away, first in a drawer at my old place, then in this chest when I moved, always telling myself I would read it when I felt strong enough. Apparently, that day was today. I sat on the edge of the bed and held the envelope for a moment, feeling the slight roughness of the paper under my fingertips. My name is written there in her looping script, Claire, in blue ink that had faded only a little. My throat tightened. I slid a finger under the flap and opened it. The first lines were simple. She wrote about the time, about the treatments, about feeling tired. She apologized for not always being cheerful, even when she tried. Reading those words made my eyes sting, because even when she had been in pain, she'd still worried about how her mood affected me. As I moved down the page, her tone changed. It became more deliberate, more like she was walking me through something important. She wrote that she did not know what the future would look like after she was gone. She did not know if Dad would ever marry again. She did not know if a woman named Lily would show up, or if there would be stepchildren or new families or any of that. She said she did not have a crystal ball and did not want to pretend she did. But she did know one thing. She knew that when people die and money or property is involved, things can get strange. She had seen it in her own relatives, she said. Cousins who stopped speaking over a piece of land. A brother who felt cheated when their parents changed a will. Good people turn cold when they start believing they are entitled to something. She wrote that she loved my dad, that he had been a good husband to her, that she was not writing out of suspicion or anger. She said she would never accuse him of bad intentions he had not shown. That part made my chest ache, because I could hear her fairness even in a letter written from a sickbed. Then she added that love does not cancel out the need for practicality. She reminded me that the cabin had come from her mother. My grandmother had given it to her with the hope that it would always be a safe place for the women in our family. A place where we could breathe if life got too crowded. A place that did not depend on anybody else's choices. She wrote that she wanted to honor that. She wanted me to have something of my own, not something I shared by default with a future partner or with my dad's potential new spouse. A place that I could decide about on my terms. So she had asked the lawyer to structure things that way. The cabin to me, in my name, not as part of a pot that might be divided later depending on who was in Dad's life. She wrote that she was not trying to cut him out. He would still have his job, his savings, his retirement. But the cabin, she said, felt like hers to give, and she wanted to give it to me cleanly, without strings. I felt tears slide down my face as I read. In one paragraph, she acknowledged directly that my dad might someday find companionship again. She said she truly hoped he would not be alone forever. He was a social man, she reminded me. Being a widower could be its own kind of cruel. If he did marry again, she hoped his new partner would be kind to me. She hoped they would treat me fairly and lovingly. Then she added a line that made me have to stop reading for a minute. But just in case, she wrote, just in case kindness does not last, or circumstances change, in ways I cannot predict, I want you to have something solid under your feet, something that cannot be argued away at a holiday table. I set the paper in my lap and closed my eyes for a moment. The image of my dad's front door flashed in my mind. The wreath, the warm light from the windows. His voice told me to go away because only important people were allowed that night. I saw it now through the lens of her words. Cannot be argued away at a holiday table. She had not known the details, but she had foreseen the possibility. Not of this exact scene, not of Lily and Emma and Jonathan specifically, but of pressure, of someone deciding that what was mine ought to be up for negotiation. I wiped my face and kept reading. In the final part of the letter, she turned her attention directly to me. She said that I had always had a soft heart, that I tried to see the best in people, that I had a weakness for giving too many chances. She said those were good qualities in many ways, but they could also get me hurt if I was not careful around money and property. She wrote that when it came to the cabin, she wanted me to practice being firm. She reminded me that saying no to someone's request was not the same as rejecting them as a person. That refusing to hand over keys to a place she had sacrificed to preserve for me was not cruel, even if they called it selfish. She told me that if I ever felt pressured, I should imagine her standing beside me, quietly shaking her head. There was a line near the end that stuck to me like it had been written in fire. One day, you may be standing in a room where people you love are talking about this cabin like a resource they should all share. When that day comes, I want you to remember, this was mine, then yours, by my choice, not by their permission. She ended the letter with a few softer lines. Little memories. A reminder that she loved me more than any argument about property. She signed it with a shaky heart under her name, as if her hand had been tired. I sat on the bed holding the pages, the cedar scent weaving around me. It felt like she was in the room, not as a ghost, not in a spooky way, but as a steady presence. The same woman who sat with me at that cabin table, painted my nails while the wind roared outside. The same woman who taught me how to balance a checkbook and read a rental agreement. Practical and loving in equal parts. There was no hint in any of her words that Dad had been unfaithful or cruel while she was alive. No hidden accusation, no bitterness, just caution, just care, just a woman who had seen enough of life to know that circumstances change, and that a daughter needs something she can count on. For a few minutes, I let myself think about the version of events Lily might tell if she ever saw this letter. She would probably say I was misinterpreting it. That mom's concern about the future did not mean the cabin should stay only in my name forever. That families evolve, that it was selfish to let a letter from years ago dictate current decisions. Maybe in another life I would have believed that, but now I know too much. I had the dates, I had the legal documents. I had Mary's words echoing in my memory about Lily and Emma and Jonathan, asking questions down at the cabin road. And now I have this. Mom's own handwriting confirms that the arrangement was not an accident or an oversight. It was intentional. It was her way of still looking out for me, years after she knew she would be gone. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope, but I did not put it away yet. I held it in my hands for a long time, feeling the slight weight of it. A few sheets of paper, yet heavier than anything my dad had said on the phone. In that moment, something inside me shifted again. Up until then, a part of me had still wondered if I was overreacting. If maybe I was reading malice where there was only clumsiness. If I was making too big a deal out of one awful Christmas and a bad phone call. My mom's voice on those pages told me I was not. She had seen this kind of story before. She had built a shield for me without knowing exactly what it would protect me from. She had trusted me to use it when the time came. I looked at the letter, then at the closed cedar chest, then back toward the doorway that led to my kitchen, where my phone lay waiting on the table. For the first time since all of this started, I did not feel like a scared child caught between her dad and his new family. I felt like a woman holding proof that her life did not have to be rewritten by someone else's plans. Mom had seen farther into the future than I had ever given her credit for. And now it was my turn to decide what to do with the warning she had left behind. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after folding Mom's letter back into its envelope. The afternoon light had shifted by the time I finally stood, my legs stiff from sitting so long. I placed the envelope gently on my nightstand, as if it were something alive, something that needed careful handling. Then I walked out to the living room and sat on the couch, staring at nothing. I had planned to call Dad back right then, armed with the truth, but some instinct inside me whispered, "Wait, do not move yet. There is more you do not see." I was still sitting there, in that strange, suspended silence when my phone rang. The screen lit up with a name I had not expected. Mary Collins, my grandmother's old neighbor at Cedar Hollow. She was the kind of woman who never missed a detail in her little stretch of mountain road. My heart kicked once, then steadied. I answered. "Claire, honey," she said in her brisk, no-nonsense voice. "I hope this is not a bad time." I hesitated, then said honestly, "It has already been a rough morning." "What is going on?" She exhaled, and I could almost picture her adjusting the phone against her shoulder, probably sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea. "I got something I think you ought to know," she said. "Something about that cabin of yours." The word cabin sent a cold line down my spine. I sat up straighter. "Emma was here last week," Mary said. She paused just long enough for the weight of her words to settle. She wanted to know how long your dad owned the place. Wanted to know if he ever mentioned putting his name on any of the paperwork. I told her your grandmother left it to your mom, and your mom left it to you. She did not seem pleased with that answer. I closed my eyes. Mary continued. "Then 2 days after that fiancé of hers, what is his name? Jonathan? He stopped by asking if I knew whether any documents had ever needed updating. He said he was helping your family get things in order for the wedding and wanted to check if the cabin should be transferred into a joint asset or something." She let out a dry laugh. I told him that was none of my business and certainly none of his. My fingers tightened around the phone. My heartbeat grew louder in my ears. She went on. "And one more thing. Lily came by last month. She said it was just neighborly curiosity, but she was asking about the value of the cabin. Asked if it had ever been part of your parents' marital property, or if it was separate." I told her what I knew, that your mom was protective about keeping it in her line. But the way Lily asked those questions, it did not sit right with me. I felt too pointed. I felt something inside me go very still. Not shocked, not surprised, just still. Like I had been waiting for confirmation without knowing it. Mary must have sensed the silence stretching on my end. "Claire," she said gently, "I do not want to stir anything up, but I have lived in these mountains a long time. I have seen families argue themselves into bitter corners over land, cabins, property lines. What I am telling you is, they asked questions that only make sense if somebody is planning to push you out of ownership." I swallowed. My throat felt tight. "That makes it clearer," I managed to say. The way things have been going, I think you are right. Now, I do not have any business in your personal matters, she said, but you listen to me. These people are circling that cabin like it is fresh meat. Do not let them tell you what belongs to you. I thanked her. She insisted I call if I needed anything, and hung up. I sat in the quiet of my apartment after the call, my phone still in my hand, my mind spinning as the final pieces settled into place. It all aligned too cleanly to ignore. First, Emma, trying to establish a timeline of ownership, trying to find a loophole, trying to see if she could argue that my dad had a stake in the cabin. Then Jonathan, pretending to help with wedding planning, but really poking around for legal cracks. Acting like transfer paperwork would be a quick fix. Acting like strong-arming me into cooperation was normal. Then Lily, asking about value, about marital asset classification, about whether the cabin had ever been folded into any kind of shared property. Individually, each question could have passed as curiosity. Together, they formed a straight line aimed at one goal: make the cabin a family asset, then make it theirs. If they could convince my dad it already belonged to him, even emotionally, then everything else would fall into place. Emma would get her dream wedding location without paying a dime. Jonathan would get a renovation project where he controlled the money. They would turn it into an Airbnb where they handled the bookings and pocketed the revenue. I pictured the cabin again. I pictured them tearing out the old cabinets. I pictured the clawfoot tub being replaced with something modern. I pictured Emma posing on the porch for bridal photos, talking about how lucky she was that her family had such a beautiful property. I pictured Jonathan calculating profit margins in my grandmother's kitchen. This is not just about a cabin. The words repeated again in my mind. This is about them deciding I was expendable. My Christmas Eve exile had not been an accident. It had been strategic. If they could cut me out emotionally, it would be easier to cut me out financially. I stood and walked to the window, pressing my hand against the glass. Outside, they looked normal, calm, like their weekend was starting the way weekends should. I could not remember the last time mine had felt normal. Behind me, my phone buzzed. A text from Dad again. I need that key. The words hit differently this time. Before, they had felt pressure. Now, this was not my dad being thoughtless. This was a coordinated plan, a slow squeeze. I turned away from the window and went back to the table, picking up Mom's letter again. I did not read it, but I held it in both hands like a compass. The picture is complete now. Emma wanted the cabin as her wedding venue. Jonathan wanted the renovation money and Airbnb income. Lily wanted the long-term value folded into her marriage. My dad wanted peace with his new family, badly enough to pretend I was the obstacle. And if I gave them the key, even once, the momentum would shift. They would begin acting like it was theirs. They would pressure. They would insist. They would point to compromises. They would try to shame me for resisting. They would talk about fairness while quietly carving me out. The plan had been crafted in whispers and half-sentences, tested at cookouts, nudged into holiday conversations, embroiled in the night they shut me out of Christmas. I understand it now. All of it. My heart clenched once, like the final lock clicking into place. I was done being pushed. I was done being polite. I was done pretending I did not know the game they were playing. I reached for my phone. Not to give Dad an answer, not yet. I needed one more step. I needed to gather every piece of proof, every document, every word, every detail that showed exactly how the cabin had come to me and why it was not theirs to claim. Then I would confront them. Not one by one, all at once. For the first time since Christmas Eve, my breath felt steady. Every piece of the puzzle had finally clicked together. And now that I saw the full picture, there was no chance they were getting the key. There was no chance they were getting the key. Once that truth settled inside me, something went quiet in my chest. Not numb, not afraid, just steady, like a door had closed and locked from my side. The next 2 days, Dad called nonstop. The calls came in waves, like he was circling the same demand from different angles. At first, I let them go to voicemail, listening as his irritation sharpened. He said we needed to move forward. He said he hoped I had come to my senses. He said this was about family. By the third day, There was pressure under every word, the tone of a man who had promised something to others and now needed me to deliver. That afternoon, while I was rinsing out a mug at the sink, my phone buzzed again. I almost ignored it, but the buzzing kept going. When I finally picked up, Dad did not waste a second. He said Jonathan was busy with wedding planning, that Emma was stressed, that they needed clarity. He asked why I insisted on making everything difficult. His voice carried the weight of expectation, not love. He never once asked how I was doing. Not about Christmas, not about the night he yelled at me, not about the days since. I listened without interrupting, my hand resting on the counter. When he paused to breathe, I answered calmly. I told him Lily and Emma and Jonathan had no right to touch the cabin. The silence on his end lasted half a second before he barked out a short, disbelieving laugh. He said I sounded childish. He reminded me he was my father and that I had responsibilities. He said the cabin was family property and I needed to stop being selfish. The old version of me would have folded under those words. I would have apologized, cried, and scrambled to make him less disappointed. But the woman standing in my kitchen was not the girl he remembered. His anger washed over me like wind hitting a wall of stone. My mother's documents were on that wall. Grandma's wishes were that wall. Mary's warning was that wall. And the truth I had uncovered about their plan was stronger than guilt. He kept going, raising his voice, saying the cabin had been part of our family life for decades. He said I was acting like a hoarder. He said no daughter of his would talk back this way. I let him empty every accusation until his voice gave out. Then I took a breath, steady and controlled, and spoke the 5 words that had been forming in my mind for days. Dad, you have no claim. The line went dead quiet. He said my name, once, soft and strained, as if hoping I would retreat, but the truth had already settled too deep inside me. I repeated it, slower. David, you have no claim. I could almost feel him recoil through the phone. He tried to gather himself, stumbling through arguments he had leaned on for years. He said he was my father. He said he had memories at the cabin too. He said Mom would never have wanted this. I let each sentence break against me before I answered. I told him the cabin had moved from Grandma Rose to Mom to me. I told him his name had never been on the deed. I reminded him that the lawyer had said so in front of him back in 2020. I walked him through the timeline. Mom died at 2018. The cabin was titled to me in early 2020. He remarried Lily later that same year. The cabin had been mine long before Lily came into the picture. I reminded him that meant the cabin had never been marital property in any of his relationships. That when he put on his wedding ring with Lily, the cabin was not part of any union or vow. He tried to interrupt, but I kept speaking, my voice as steady as I could make it. I told him that whatever Lily had whispered to him was not law, that Emma's wedding did not create ownership, that Jonathan's real estate opinions did not erase legal boundaries, that their hopes and plans did not magically rewrite a will written by 2 generations of women. He shifted tactics. He said families are about generosity, not paperwork, that I was forgetting what Mom would have wanted, that I was letting grief twist me into someone cold. The mention of my mother hurt, but it also clarified everything. If we were talking about Mom's wishes, I had them in writing. No guesses, not assumptions, her words, her decisions. Her intention is that the cabin stay mine. I told him using her name to pressure me was not fair, and it was not going to work. He tried again, reaching for something else. He said the Airbnb income could help him in old age. He said he had worked hard all his life and deserved some comfort. He said he had sacrificed for me, and now it was time I sacrificed for the family. The guilt card again. Familiar, predictable, no longer effective. I told him gently but firmly that his comfort did not depend on taking something from me. That he had his own home, his own savings. That what he wanted was convenience, not necessity. And that he did not get to paint my boundaries as cruelty. I laid out the 4 points as clearly as any attorney could have. 1. The cabin is a direct inheritance through my mother's side. It belongs only to me. 2. It never belonged to you legally, not during your marriage, not after, never. 3. When you remarried Lily, the cabin was separate property. Nothing about your new marriage touched it. 4. Lily and her daughter and her future son-in-law have absolutely no legal claim, moral claim, emotional claim, or practical claim on it. Their desires are not rights. He breathed heavily on the other end, like each point landed physically. Then he asked if I truly intended to damage our relationship over a piece of property. That was the worst part, that he asked as though the damage had not already been done by the Christmas Eve door slamming in my face. I told him the relationship had been damaged when he chose someone else's comfort over my dignity, when he shut me out on a winter night and pretended it was nothing, when he called only to demand, never to ask, when he believed Lily's wants were worth more than my history, my memories, my inheritance. He said nothing. I could sense him searching for another angle, maybe imagining Emma upset, maybe Lily curled against him whispering how unfair I was, maybe Jonathan insisted the cabin was wasted on me, maybe the shame of having told them he could deliver something he never owned. But none of that gave him new words. His voice was smaller when he finally spoke. He said Lily might not forgive me. He said Emma might uninvite me from the wedding. He said I should think about the consequences. I told him softly that the consequences had already arrived on Christmas Eve, when he told me to go away. That I had survived it then, and I would survive it again. There was no shouting at the end, no dramatic final speech, just the brittle sound of a man running out of stories to tell himself. He said he had to go, and he hung up. The quiet in my kitchen was heavier than before. Grief came first, settling in my ribs. Grief for the father I thought I had. Grief for the years when I believed he saw me. Grief for the things I could not fix. But beneath the grief, something stronger rose. Resolve. Certainty. The faint warmth of standing tall for the first time in my life. I knew Lily and Emma and Jonathan would not accept this quietly. I knew their plan had been built carefully, and they would fight to salvage it. I knew the next storm was coming. But for the first time, I was not afraid. I reached for Mom's letter on the counter, held it to my chest, and breathed. The next move was mine. The cabin was quiet when I arrived early that morning. Snow still clung to the branches of the pines, weighing them down like tired shoulders. The air had that sharp cold that made every sound feel louder. I stood on the porch with the folder in my hands and let myself breathe once before walking inside. I had invited them all for 10 o'clock. I did not know if they would actually come, but when the gravel crackled under the first set of tires, I felt something steady settle in my chest. My dad's truck rolled up first. Lily was in the passenger seat, her lips pressed into a thin pink line. Emma's car pulled in a moment later, her old silver sedan packed with wedding magazines in the back seat. Jonathan stepped out behind her, adjusting his coat like he was arriving for a business pitch. For a moment, they all lingered outside, looking at me with 3 different expressions. My dad looked tense, defensive already. Lily looked wary, like she was walking into an inspection she might not pass. Emma looked annoyed, the way she always did when something was not immediately going her way. Jonathan looked confident, too confident, the kind of man who thought charm could solve everything. I opened the door and stepped aside. "We should talk inside," I said. "It will be warmer." No one argued. They came in one by one, bringing the cold air with them. When the door closed, I walked to the dining table, the same table where Mom and I used to play cards during winter storms. I set the folder down and opened it slowly. Every movement felt heavy, deliberate. My dad watched me closely, eyes narrowing with confusion and something else. Maybe fear, maybe guilt, maybe both. "Let's get to the point," Emma said, folding her arms. "We all have things to do today." The way she said it made my skin prickle, but I kept my voice even. "We will. I just want everything to be clear." Jonathan let out a soft sigh, like he was being patient with a child. "All right, Claire, lay it out for us. What is all this about?" I pulled out the first document, a photocopy of my grandmother's will. The signature is faint, the edges worn. "This is the will from my grandmother," I said. "She left the cabin to my mom, only my mom. Not my dad, not the family as a whole, my mom." I placed it on the table. Next, I pulled out my mom's will, the document that had sat in my filing drawer for years, untouched because reading it hurt too much. "This is from Mom," I said. She left the cabin to me alone. I placed it next to the first document. Then I added the title transfer papers from 2020, listing only my name. This shows the cabin was put fully in my name before Dad remarried Lily. My dad's shoulders slumped slightly. Lily glanced at him, then quickly looked away. I was not done. I reached into the folder one more time and pulled out my phone. I scrolled to the audio file Mary had let me record during our call. I had asked her permission, and she had agreed without hesitation, saying people needed to be careful when others tried to twist the truth. I set the phone on the table and hit play. Mary's voice filled the cabin, steady and matter-of-fact. She said that Emma had come by asking how long my dad had owned the cabin. She said that Jonathan wanted to know what paperwork would be needed to move the cabin into joint ownership. She said that Lily had visited the month before, asking whether the cabin had ever been marital property and how much it might be worth. Their reactions were immediate. Jonathan's face turned white first. The confidence drained out of him in seconds. His jaw flexed. His eyes darted to Emma, then to Lily, then to my dad. Emma shot to her feet so fast, her chair scraped across the wooden floor. Her voice trembled with anger and panic. "Why did you tell her that?" she shouted at Lily. "Why did you drag us into this mess? You told us it would be easy. You said she never uses the cabin. You said it should have been family property anyway." Lily stepped back like Emma had slapped her. She shook her head quickly. "I never said that. I only asked questions. I just needed information." "Do not put this on me." Jonathan looked at her sharply. "So you did ask. You told us it was basically Dad's property already. You are the one who pushed us to look into the documents." My dad's eyes snapped toward Lily so quickly it was almost painful to watch. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Lily, what exactly did you tell them?" Her hands trembled slightly as she tucked her hair behind her ear. She tried to smile, the kind of smile someone wears when they're hoping the truth will soften if they pretend hard enough. "Mark," she said gently, "I only asked a few questions. I wanted to understand the situation. I never meant for things to get complicated." He stared at her. His face showed something I had never seen before. He was not angry. Not yet. He was realizing something. "Lily," he said again, slower this time. "What did you tell me?" She looked away. That was her answer. Every inch of him tightened, his shoulders, his jaw, even the way he stood, as if the ground under him had shifted. Emma dropped back into her chair with a thud. Jonathan stood rigid beside her, staring at the floor like he was doing mental calculations, and every number kept coming out wrong. I sat quietly, watching it unravel. All of them turned against one another the moment the truth came into them. Light. All those little whispers and side conversations and confident assumptions withering in front of the paperwork. My dad finally turned to me. He looked older than any number could measure. His voice had a crack in it I had never heard. "Claire, did she really come out here asking about the cabin's value?" I nodded. "And Emma? And Jonathan?" I nodded again. He closed his eyes, and I saw something inside him break a little. Not loud, but real. The kind of break that comes when you finally see the truth of the people you love. Trusted. He looked at Lily again. His voice was thinner now. "Did you lie to me?" She shook her head, quickly. Too quickly. "Mark, I never lied. I only asked questions. I never said it belonged to us. I just thought it should be discussed." "Discussion," he said quietly, "was not what happened at Christmas." Lily froze. He knew. He finally saw it. The humiliation at the door, the shouting, the way he had chosen her side so quickly, the way Christmas had turned into a wall between us because someone else had been whispering in his ear. Lily opened her mouth to defend herself, but no words came out. She looked from him to Emma to Jonathan and back again, her expression cracking at the edges. I did not say anything. I did not need to. Every piece that had been hidden was now sitting in plain sight on the table, between us. The wills, the title, the recording, the truth. My dad's hands curled into fists at his sides. He was not angry at me. He was angry at what he had allowed, by the way he had rearranged his loyalties without realizing the cost. He took one long breath, then opened his eyes. They were wet and red, but steady. "I think," he said quietly, "you three need to explain yourselves." The room went very still, except for the wind brushing against the windows. For the first time in months, maybe in years, I saw my dad not as the man who pushed me aside, but as the man forced to see the consequences of doing it. And Lily did not have a single answer left to give. The silence in the cabin felt heavy, like the air itself had thickened. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows in long, slow breaths. Inside, every pair of eyes seemed to be looking for someone else to blame. Jonathan was the first to move. He straightened his shoulders, smoothed his tie in a quick, agitated gesture, then looked at the documents on the table again. The wills, the title, my phone with Mary's voice still echoing quietly in the background before I stopped the recording. "So that is it," he said, more to himself than to anyone. "The cabin is really hers." Emma jerked her head toward him. She still looked stunned, her face blotchy from the tears she was trying not to shed. "Of course it is hers," she snapped. "You knew there was a chance of that. You promised you would figure it out." Jonathan turned his gaze on her, and for the first time, I saw something hard and cold in his eyes that had nothing to do with me. There was no charm left, no fake patience. "Figure it out," he repeated slowly. "Emma, I am not a magician. I cannot manufacture ownership where there is none. Everything we planned hinged on this place. The wedding, the photos, the rental income, all of it." He swept a hand toward the windows, toward the lake, the tall trees, the porch my grandmother had stained herself. "Without this cabin," he said, "the numbers do not work." Emma stared at him like she did not understand the language he was speaking. "Numbers," she said. "You are talking about numbers right now." He did not flinch. "What did you think this was?" he asked. "Love does not pay for venues and honeymoons and credit card debt. We talked about this. The cabin was supposed to be our starting point. We put in the sweat equity, your dad gets family use, and the rest of the time, it is an income stream." My stomach twisted. Hearing the way he framed it so bluntly, without even trying to soften it, made everything I had suspected feel even grimmer. Emma shook her head, desperation rising in her voice. "We can find another way," she insisted. "Maybe we can still convince Claire. Maybe Dad can talk to her. She is being unreasonable, that is all." She turned to me with wild eyes. "Tell him," she demanded. "Tell him you will reconsider. You said you loved Dad. You cannot honestly be willing to blow up my entire wedding over a cabin. That is crazy." I held her gaze. I did not raise my voice. "I have already given my answer," I said quietly. "The cabin is not part of this wedding." Jonathan exhaled in a sharp, bitter laugh. "There it is," he said, plain and simple. He looked back at Emma. "You pushed this," he said. "You told me your dad basically owned the cabin in everything but name. You said Claire would fold if we pressed hard enough. You said your mom had it handled." He nodded toward Lily. "And now," he went on, "it turns out none of that was true. There is no asset, no leverage, nothing to work with." Emma gaped at him. "So what?" she said. "We adjust. We cut back on a few things. We wait another year. We tighten the budget. People do that all the time." Her voice broke on the last word. Jonathan stared at her like she was suggesting something offensive. "Wait another year," he repeated. "Live in that cramped apartment for another 12 months. Put off paying down my loans because you want flowers and custom place settings. They were not just flowers," she shot back. "And your loans are not my fault." He looked at her for a long moment. Then something in his expression shuddered completely. "This is not what I signed up for," he said. The words hung there, heavy, mean. "What?" Emma whispered. "What did you just say?" Jonathan shrugged, as if the whole conversation bored him. "I am not marrying into chaos," he said. "Not without the stability we talked about. No cabin, no project, no extra income. Just stress and drama and a dad who cannot keep his own family from falling apart." He glanced at my father with a pointed look that made my dad flinch. Emma stared at him as if he had slapped her. "You are leaving me," she said slowly, like she was testing the shape of the words. "Over this." "Over reality," he corrected. "Maybe your family can afford to ignore the numbers. I cannot. I am not going to tie myself to a situation where every promise falls apart. The second someone grows a backbone." It was not lost on me who he meant by someone. Emma reached for him then, fingers grazing his sleeve. "Jonathan, please," she said. "We can fix this. I will talk to Claire. I will make her see." He stepped back. "I am done trying," he said. "I wanted a partnership, not a mess." He turned toward the door without another word. Emma made a small, broken sound, half sob and half disbelief. She took a step after him, then another, but it was like her legs would not carry her all the way. He opened the door, cold air rushed in, and then he was gone. The crunch of his boots on the snow faded down the steps, then the sound of his car starting drifted into the silence. The door swung shut on its own. For a moment, I could not move. My heart hurt for Emma in a way I did not entirely expect. She had been cruel to me, greedy, entitled. Yet watching her stand there, hollow and stunned, as the man she planned to marry simply walked away, I felt a pang of something raw and human. But I could not ignore the truth either. This was what it looked like when you built your future on someone else's property and assumptions, and you watched it crumble. Emma lowered herself back into the chair like her bones had vanished. She stared at the table, at the papers, at nothing. Her face had gone pale. Dad looked completely shaken. He had followed the argument with wide eyes, his attention snapping between Emma and Jonathan like a spectator at a match he had not trained for. Now he turned toward Lily. "What just happened?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Lily still stood off to the side, arms crossed over her chest, face tight. She had watched Jonathan walk out without saying a single word. Her eyes were on the documents, not on Emma. Dad took a breath. "Did he really just leave my daughter because she cannot steal a cabin?" he asked quietly. There was a tremor in his words that scared me more than his earlier anger. Lily finally looked at him. Her expression was complicated, a mix of irritation and calculation, and something like resignation. "He is practical," she said. "Maybe too practical, but he is not wrong about the growth potential. This place could have set everyone up. Everyone who Dad asked." He was still speaking softly, but each word had a sharp edge now. "Everyone in this room, or everyone you consider your real family." Lily blinked. "Mark, that is not fair," she started. He did not let her finish. "No," he said. "I do not think fair has been part of this for a while." He pointed at the documents with a shaking hand. "You told me this cabin was basically family property," he said. "You told me Claire was being selfish, that it was time for her to grow up and share. You made it sound like I had some rightful say in it. But looking at this, looking at the dates, at what Alice wrote, at what her mother wrote before her, none of that was true. None." Lily opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "I only thought," she said, "that it would be better for everybody if things were consolidated. That is all." David stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "Really seeing her?" he asked, very quietly. "Were you planning on living off this cabin in retirement? Was that the plan? Marry me, count my daughter's inheritance as ours, and hope she stays too guilty to say no?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "That is insulting," she said. "I married you because I did not want to be alone, because we had a good time together. Because you needed someone." He nodded slowly. "I did," he said. "I did need someone. And I thought I had found a partner. Not someone who would stand in my kitchen and convince me to throw my own child off the porch on Christmas Eve, so her cabin would be easier to grab." Emma made a small noise, curling inward as if the words physically hit her. Lily looked away, her jaw clenched. "You were the one who yelled at her," she said. "I did not make you." "No," he said. "But you stood behind me and told me it was the right thing. You told me Claire was dramatic. You told me she was holding us back. You told me Jonathan could help us manage the cabin for income. You were very clear about what you wanted, Lily." He paused. "The question is, was I ever what you wanted? Or was it always this place? For a moment, no one breathed. Lily looked at him. Really looked. And I saw her make a decision behind her eyes. Not to apologize. Not to repair. To cut her losses. She reached for her purse, lifted it from the back of the chair, and slid the strap over her shoulder. "Mark," she said, her voice suddenly cool and distant, "you do not have anything of your own that cannot disappear with a bad market, or a medical bill. I thought together we could build something more secure. If your daughter will not cooperate, that is her right, but I do not have to stick around for the fallout." David flinched as if she had slapped him. "So that is it," he said. "No cabin, no you." She gave a little shrug. "You are a good man," she said, "but I am not in a place in life where love alone is enough. Without this asset, you do not bring much to the table, Mark. I am sorry. That is just reality." She was not sorry, not even a little. She walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the cold without looking back. The sound of her car engine echoed down the driveway a minute later, then faded into the hush of the trees. The cabin was very quiet after that. Emma sat hunched over, staring at the floor like she could not comprehend that Jonathan and Lily had. Both left her in the same morning. My dad stood near the table, one hand gripping the back of a chair so tightly his knuckles had gone white. His eyes were shiny, but no tears fell. He looked at the empty doorway for a long time. Then he looked at the papers again. Then, slowly, he turned his head toward me. I saw it land in him all at once. Not just that he had been wrong about the cabin, not just that he had hurt me, but that the people he had chosen over me had been using him as a bridge to something they wanted. That once the bridge stopped leading anywhere, they did not hesitate to walk away. For the first time since all of this began, my dad looked truly alone, and I did not have to say a single word for him to understand exactly why. My dad stood there in the quiet of the cabin, staring at the empty doorway where Lily had walked out, and at the spot where Jonathan had disappeared down the snowy steps. Emma sat folded into herself at the table, her breathing shallow and shaky. The morning light through the windows seemed too bright for the heaviness in the room. I could feel his eyes shift toward me again, but I did not look back. Not out of cruelty, just out of exhaustion. Everything in that cabin felt cracked open, and none of the pieces belonged to me to fix. Eventually, he cleared his throat. It was a soft sound, the kind he used to make when he was uncomfortable and trying to gather a few seconds before speaking. But this time it sounded older, worn down. "Claire," he said. But nothing followed. Like the second half of the sentence had fallen out of his reach. I picked up the folder from the table, closed it, and held it against my chest. I did not say anything. Not yet. The weight of this moment was heavy enough without me adding to it. Dad looked at Emma, then at me again. He exhaled through his nose and shook his head a little. "I never thought," he said quietly, "that it would come to this." There was no anger in his voice, no sharpness. Just confusion, hurt, and something else under it. Something close to humiliation. I walked toward the door, gripping the knob, ready to step outside for some air. Before I could pull it open, he spoke again, louder this time, like the words burst out of him before he could lose courage. "Claire, please, just wait." I stood still, my hand still resting on the cold metal. He tried again. "Claire, I am sorry." The words were thin and shaky, but they were real. I turned slowly to face him. He swallowed hard. "I've been sitting here," he said, "looking at the papers you brought, hearing what Mary said, watching what Lily and Jonathan did, and I keep thinking about Christmas Eve, about how I stood behind that door and yelled at you like you were a stranger." His voice broke on the last word. I closed my eyes for a moment. Dad moved his hand through his hair, a gesture he always used to do when he felt lost. He looked smaller than I remembered, not in age, but in certainty. All those years of trying to patch together a new family had collapsed in front of him. I thought, he said, that blending families meant making sacrifices. I wanted everyone to get along. I wanted a life where Emma felt accepted, where Lily was happy, where things did not feel empty without your mom. The mention of my mom made something twist in my stomach, soft and aching. He went on. Lily told me the cabin should be shared. She said it would stop arguments down the road. She said it would bring everyone closer. I did not see what she was really doing. He rubbed his forehead. I never imagined she would pressure Emma and Jonathan to get involved. I never imagined she would. He stopped, unable to find a word that fit. I let him sit in that silence for a few seconds. The wind rattled a loose branch outside. Emma let out a tiny, broken sound, but did not lift her face from her hands. Finally, I said, Dad, you have to take responsibility for your choices. My voice did not shake. It did not rise. I was not cruel, just honest. He nodded immediately, almost too quickly, as though he had been waiting for me to say exactly that. I know, he whispered. I know I do. I pushed you. I listened to the wrong people. I let myself believe things that were easier than facing the truth. And I hurt you. I hurt you badly. The rawness of it made my throat tighten. I turned away for a moment and looked out the window at the lake, frozen over in a sheet of pale glass. Dad took one slow breath. I cannot ask you to forgive me, he said. Not now. Maybe not ever, but I want you to know I see it. All of it. I was blind, and I am ashamed of how quickly I let other people talk me into thinking you were the problem. I felt something inside me loosen. Not healing. Not yet. But a knot that had been pulled too tight had finally slackened. I walked back toward the table and set the folder down. Emma sniffed, her face red and streaked. But she did not speak. Dad sank into the chair across from her. His shoulders sagged with a weight I had never seen him carry. He looked at his hands, turning them over like he did not recognize them. I should have protected you, he said softly. Instead, I let people who barely knew you paint you as selfish, and I believed them, because it was easier than seeing what they wanted from me. I pulled out the chair at the end of the table and sat, leaving space between us. Not rejecting him, not embracing him. Just a place where conversation could live without pressure. David looked at me, eyes tired but steady. I do not want to lose you, he said. Not over this. Not over anything. I held his gaze. You did not lose me, I said. But you did break something. It will take time to see how much of it can be repaired. His eyes shone, but he blinked the wetness away quickly. Time, he said. I can live with that. Time is fair. Emma finally lifted her head. Her voice choked. God, what am I supposed to do? He reached across the table and placed a hand over hers. For all his flaws, he loved her too. He always had. That was never the problem. We will figure it out, he murmured. But not by stealing from someone else. Not by pretending things belong to us when they do not. Emma wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. She nodded, though she still looked as if her whole world had caved in. Maybe it had, but it was a world built on shaky ground, and that collapse was inevitable. I stood, feeling the strain of the entire morning in my bones. Dad rose too, stepping toward me with hesitation, like he was afraid I might flinch. He said my name again. Claire. Thank you for not walking out. I let out a slow breath. I am not walking out, I said. But things will not go back to the way they were. Not immediately. Maybe not ever. You have to understand that. His shoulders dropped, accepting it. I do, he said quietly. And I want to earn whatever place I have left in your life. Not take it. Earn it. He reached for his coat, not to leave, but to step outside for air. I could tell he needed it. So did I. Before he opened the door, he paused and looked at the cabin again, not with greed, not with entitlement, but with grief and clarity. Your mom wanted this to be yours, he said, and she was right. She always saw further than I did. The truth of that line went straight through me. He stepped outside, the cold air rushing around him. Emma stayed seated, staring at her hands, and I remained in the doorway for a moment, letting the cold touch my face, letting my heart settle around the shape of something that was not forgiveness yet, but was no longer rage. Not turning my back, not running to patch things, just standing in the middle, letting reality breathe. It was not a resolution, not yet, but it was the beginning of one. Not a perfect fresh start, Not some magical reset, just the first small step away from damage and towards something more honest. The weeks after that day at the cabin moved in a strange rhythm. Life did not stop just because my family had exploded in front of me. I still had deadlines, grocery lists, bills on the counter. But underneath the ordinary, something inside me was rearranging. I started going back to the cabin on weekends again. At first, it felt almost wrong to drive up that winding road, like I was sneaking into a place that had been dragged through too many arguments. But once the trees closed in around the car and the lake came into view, a familiar calm settled over me. The new locks clicked solidly when I turned the key. The security system chirped when I disarmed it. I walked through each room slowly, touching the backs of chairs, the edges of picture frames, and the mantel where my mom used to line up scented candles in winter. The cabin felt quiet, but not empty. It felt like it had drawn a long, deep breath after months of being eyed like a prize. One Saturday afternoon, I stood in the tiny kitchen and looked out the window at the snow-covered yard. A squirrel darted across the porch rail. The sky was a pale gray. The world outside was simple and still. Inside my head, though, something kept turning over and over. The cabin was safe now. The paperwork was clear. The locks were new. The people who wanted to take it had shown themselves and walked away. So what was I going to do with it? My mom had not given me this place, so I could spend my life guarding it like a museum. She wanted it to be a refuge, yes, but she also wanted me to have a future, a real one. Back in Denver that week, I spread my finances out on my kitchen table. Bank statements, savings, a rough estimate of what the cabin was worth now, after all the improvements my mom had made and the work I had done over the years. My eyes kept drifting to the sketchbook on the edge of the table, the one full of drawings and mood boards and small interior design plans I had been playing with since my early 20s. I had always wanted to open a design studio, a small one, something that focused on real homes for real people, not glossy magazine spreads. I had never done it because it felt irresponsible, risky, indulgent. Now, after watching other people try to claim what was mine, it struck me how strange that was. I had been afraid to use my own assets to build my own life, while others had been eager to use it to build theirs. That realization loosened something in me again. A few days later, I walked into a small branch of a local credit union in Denver with a neat folder under my arm. The clerk at the front desk smiled and asked how she could help. I told her I wanted to speak to someone about a home equity line of credit. I said the words calmly, like they belonged to me. Because they did. I was not mortgaging my future to bail someone else out. I was borrowing carefully against an asset that was fully mine to invest in, something I had dreamed about for a decade. The loan officer was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a practical manner. She looked over my documents, asked questions about my income, my plans, and the cabin. We talked about limits and interests and safety. There was nothing dramatic about it. No manipulation, no pressure. Just information and choices. By the time I left, the process was in motion. I would not be draining the equity, just using a small portion as a tool, enough to sign a lease on a modest commercial space and cover initial costs for a small interior design studio in Denver. Enough to buy myself a chance. Driving home, I felt something my mom would have recognized. Not revenge, not victory. Pride. I could almost hear her voice in the passenger seat, telling me this was exactly the kind of decision she hoped I would make. Thoughtful. Legal. Independent. Rooted in what was ours, not what anyone else claimed. While my future was taking shape, my dad's life got quieter. Lily moved her things out within a week of that day at the cabin. There was no dramatic fight from what I heard. No big scene. She just packed her clothes and perfume and framed photos of herself and Emma, and she left. If she missed the house or my dad, she never showed it. Emma sent one short message. It said that she needed time and asked me not to contact her for a while. I respected that. We were not ready to talk, and forcing a conversation would not change what had happened. My dad stayed in the house alone. The first time he called me after that, it was late on a Wednesday evening. I was sitting on my couch in sweats, looking over paint samples for the studio. His name lit up my phone, and my stomach did a familiar, uneasy flip. I answered anyway. His voice sounded different, rougher, a little slower, like each word had weight. He asked how I was. Not about the cabin, not about money. About me, my work, whether I was sleeping, whether I was eating something besides toast and coffee. Only then did he talk about himself. He said the house was too quiet. Lily had taken all the little noises out with her, and he was left with the kind of quiet that made a man think about everything he had done wrong. He said he kept seeing me on his porch that night in December, holding that dessert in my hands while he shouted through the door. He said he was sorry, not as a line to get something, just as a fact. I did not tell him it was all right. It was not. I did not tell him I forgave him. I was not there yet. I told him, I heard him, that his apology mattered, that healing would take time. We talked like that for a few weeks. Short phone calls, little check-ins, no talk of Lily or Emma unless he brought them up. And even then, I did not pick at the wound. Forgiveness, I realized, is not a prize you hand someone after they say the right words. It is a process you walk through at your own pace, holding your own boundaries. About a month later, he asked if I would meet him for breakfast. Just us, he said. No one else. A diner near your place. I said I would think about it. Then I called back the next day and told him yes. The diner was one of those old places that smelled like coffee and bacon and pancakes, no matter what time of day it was. When I walked in, he was already in a booth by the window, hands wrapped around a mug like he needed its warmth to hold him together. When he saw me, he stood up too fast and almost knocked the table. It would have been funny in any other life. We sat. The waitress poured coffee. For a few minutes, we talked about small things. The weather, my job, his bad back, the way the neighborhood was changing. Then he put his mug down and looked at me with an expression I had not seen in a long time. I am proud of you, he said. Really proud. Not just of what you did at the cabin, though that took more courage than I have shown in years, but of the woman you have turned into. Independent, brave, clear. My throat tightened. He went on, and I am grateful you did not shut the door on me forever. I would have deserved it. I know that. Thank you for not giving up on your foolish old dad. The words were not perfect. He messed up the order a little. His voice cracked. But they were true. I did not reach across the table and fix everything in a single moment. Real life rarely works that way. What I did was smile, small but real, and tell him I was glad he had called. The breakfast was not magical. He still said things that made me roll my eyes internally. I still felt flashes of anger at times. But there were also moments of shared laughter, memories of my mom that made us both soften. Honest pauses where we admitted we did not know the right words. When we hugged in the parking lot afterward, it felt like hugging a man who was trying, not a man who believed he was owed forgiveness. For me, that was enough for that day. That night I drove back up to the cabin. The sky was clear and full of stars. The air bit at my cheeks when I got out of the car. I unlocked the door, turned off the alarm, and stepped into the familiar warmth of the small living room. I walked to the window and opened it a few inches, letting the cold night air drift in. The scent of pine and snow mixed with the smell of old wood and the faint trace of my mom's favorite candle that still lingered in the cracks. I stood there for a long time, looking out at the dark line of trees and the pale glimmer of the frozen lake. This little cabin had been the center of a storm I never asked for. People had tried to use it as a tool, a bargaining chip, a shortcut. They had seen it as a thing to be captured. But it was never just a thing. It was my grandmother's hands sanding the porch rail, my mom's laughter floating out of the kitchen, my own teenage tears soaking into the old couch after my first breakup. It was 3 generations of women quietly building something solid in a world where solid things are rare. And now, it was my anchor. My leverage, the place I could return to while I built a new life in the city, using its value to invest in my own dreams, instead of financing someone else's. I smiled, alone in that warm little room. I had not lost my family. I had lost the people who never truly saw me as family in the first place. My dad and I were starting again, not from the fantasy of who we wished each other were, but from the truth of who we actually were. Flawed, hurt, trying. Emma and I were still distant. Maybe one day there would be space for a quieter conversation. Maybe not. Either way, I no longer felt responsible for fixing her choices. Lily and Jonathan were gone. They could hunt for another opportunity somewhere else. Whoever they chose next, I hoped that person had clearer boundaries than my dad and I had once had. As for me, I had a key in my hand, my name on a deed, a line of credit set up at a small Denver bank, and a lease waiting to be signed on a tiny design studio near a street full of people carrying coffee and possibility. My revenge, if you want to call it that, was not in watching anyone suffer. It was in refusal to be used, in standing tall in my own story, in protecting what was mine and then using it to build a future I could be proud of. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.